All right, everyone, greetings. Welcome to TUT number 2 for Leadership Studies number 1, CLC version in term 4 at Cornerstone Institute. Today's topic is called Leadership Theory. Are leaders born or made? My name is Chris Kowalski. I'm your lecturer, and today is the 17th of September, 2014. While we're waiting to see if anybody else joins online, why don't you guys do me a favor? And if you have a secondary device in front of you, please go into your Funda under under Resources, Keynote, PDFs, and there are 3 different PDFs that I would like you to open up for today. One is just the notes that you're going to see on this screen, so you can just read that on your own device as I'm flipping through it myself. And then the other is something that you're going to need some sort of copy for, and those are 2 little articles about a pastor by the name of Mark Driscoll. So if you could do me a favor and find those within Funda, what I will do in just a moment is show you where they are, but you guys are smart. Please go into your Funda under Resources, and within the Resources folder there is a smaller folder called Keynote PDFs. Open up what I uploaded in there today, and we'll start together in just a moment. Everyone's a star on time. It's just like it's what you say. See for myself, it's no degree. It's how I go. That's how I go. All right, everyone, welcome. We're going to get started just to honor your time. You'll see that I have already gone into our Funda site together, and just want to show you, if you have not been able to look at this point yet, that there is a lot of information that has been uploaded to get you started to engage in this class. You will see, just so you know, I'm not going to click on all of these links. You will see that we have all of the information uploaded for a module introduction, including videos and comments, and even last week's tutorial broadcast has been uploaded to here. And then this is what I really wanted to show you just now. Our entire first part of our learning together in regards to the first 4 theories of the 10 theories of leadership we're going to learn has all been uploaded to here. So you all have plenty of work to jump into now. There are video clips, there are articles, there are little exercises, things for you to leave comments upon, etc. And I just wanted to show you that this is there. One thing I will point out to you before I move forward and ask if there are any questions on this is that, is that the section from Unit 1, Part 2 down, that will still be populated with content even later this week. But there is plenty for you to get into. There's even what we are going to be doing today, a version of, with a different thing called a learning lab. And so I'm really excited about this content and excited about your engagement with it. Thank you for your patience with that. One thing I want to suggest, just in relation to the module outline, which you'll see that I'm clicking on now, is that I made a small change on the module outline in regards to your assessment grades. I am not requiring you to add an additional assessment, but I want you to know that in assessment 2 and 3, I have slightly lowered the percentage of the overall grade by about 5% per assessment, so that we can create something that I should have just included in the first part, but I failed to do so, which is just a self-graded percentage of your online participation and engagement. Both you and myself are going to self-evaluate the degree to which you participate online. That doesn't mean that you need to post everywhere or post massive amounts of responses or whatever, but I do want to see you engaged thoughtfully. That doesn't mean, again, lots and lots and lots of words. Often the best responses are the shortest and most succinct. But you'll see that 10% of your final grade will be in relation to online participation and engagement. If you have further personal questions about that, please message me. But I just wanted to share that with you before we move on. Give me a second, and if there are any questions, please type them into the chat box or unmute yourself now. Okay, moving forward then, let me change the screen share and we will jump into our content for today. Today's topic is called Leadership Theory Part 1. We're going to specifically look at two different theories. Well, really one, actually, out of these particular theories. Your entire first section of Unit 1 within the lesson template on Funda is about these particular four theories, so there's lots of information on there for you. But what I want to do today, both in sort of a reflective way as well as in a bit of a dialogue way, both with your voice as well as with your typing, is to help us think through this idea called a great man theory of leadership. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to just explain that in brief, and then we're going to spend the rest of our short broadcast together jumping into what I call a learning lab. And what a learning lab is just a space or an environment, much like a laboratory, where we can look at some content and try to ask questions of critical analysis as well as application for our own contexts and environments. And so it's not necessarily about sort of the rote learning of memory. You know, you can do that on your own. Rather, it is about taking learning and concepts and applying them to your own life. Hence the idea of a learning lab. So, in brief, let me take a moment and introduce you to a theory of leadership that has been more influential than any other theory, and that is called the great man theory of leadership. A man by the name of Thomas Carlyle said that the history of the world is but the biography of great men. He wrote that in the 1840s. And essentially what he was saying, this man took a look at kings and presidents and prime ministers and influential generals and other people that were massively important throughout world history, particularly a history of European and Western civilizations. So you already sort of hear a bias there. And he was trying to say, what can we learn from those leaders? And so let me read you just a short paragraph about this particular theory, and then I'll explain why I have a funny-looking picture of Napoleon on your screen. The great man theory is a 19th century idea according to which history can be largely explained by the impact of great men, or heroes. Highly influential individuals who, due to either their personal charisma, intelligence, wisdom, or political skill, utilized their power in a way that had a decisive historical impact. This theory was popularized in the 1840s by Scottish writer Thomas Carlyle, and in 1860, Herbert Spencer formulated a counter-argument that has remained influential throughout the 20th century to the present. Spencer said that such great men are the products of their societies, and that their actions would be impossible without the social conditions built before their lifetimes. Now that's a mouthful. So let me return to this first slide and just give you a moment to possibly capture down in your own words just a bit of an idea of what the great man theory actually is. I'll return to the first slide and give you a moment to catch up now. I'm sorry for some of you that are slower readers, but I'm going to move on to the next slide so you can get the second half of that quote. Now, what I'd like you to do is the following two things. Take a moment and just with whoever you're with, or if you're alone, talk out loud to yourself. And what I want you to do is I want you to, in your own words, very simply, define what you think Thomas Carlyle means by the great man theory of leadership. What does he mean? What is that essentially saying in your own words? When you have an answer, or when one person in your cohort or group has an answer, will one of you just jam up to the group chat area and throw a simple definition on there for me? I'll give you a moment to do that, and then I'll move forward with some of my own thoughts. While you're typing your thoughts into the group chat, I'm going to put up just a few thoughts that I came up with thinking about this theory. And so here is my slide and the things that I've thought about. Again, the idea on the table, the simple question on the table is, what does Thomas Carlyle mean when he says, very famously, the history of the world is but the biography of great men? Essentially, what is that saying about leadership and what leadership is?
Hello, this is Dr. Brooklyn.
Hello, Doxa, go for it.
Yeah, we just think that he's basically just trying to say that history is the result of great leaders, main leaders that made decisions that impacted history, and that's basically what we think.
And to be a leader, you have to be able to make a difference.
Right. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Sorry, one moment. Eden, Nisa, can you hear me? I see you guys. You're saying that you cannot hear anything. Do you need to reboot? Sorry, 1 second, Doxa. We'll move forward in just a moment. Eden, Nisa, if you guys need to sign out and sign back in, please go ahead and do that. I'm going to move forward, though. Doxa, you guys are right on. That quote has been incredibly influential in the development of leadership theory throughout the last 175 years or so. And some of the things that sort of stem from that really, in lots of ways, are the foundation for leadership theory and this entire class, weirdly enough. And so just a few simple bullet points. You can read these on the screen, but definitely ideas that stemmed from Carlyle and other people's work that began to comment on Carlyle were things like the following. Heroes are the people who shape history, and they do so through a combination of divine inspiration and their own personal attributes. And so definitely there is a deep sense in Carlyle's writing that I as a leader was chosen by God for this particular task, whether that task was a great crusade or a world war or something, possibly a bit more noble. And there was this intermixing sense that God sort of put me on earth for this purpose, as well as the idea that I am made in this way. So very deeply, back to our initial question for today, are leaders born or made? The great man theory would solidly say leaders are born. Some people are born that way, other people are not. You are not made, you don't learn leadership, etc. You just are. Particularly this sort of idea arose, as the world sort of went into, or at least the Western world went into the First and Second World War in the 1900s. And if you sort of hear this comment, this sounds like almost like a Churchill sort of quote. An idea out of this said that great leaders arise when there's great felt need to be met. And so again, whether your need is eradicating polio, or some sort of economic relief in poverty, or again, combating a great evil like the rise of Nazism, great leaders step up when there's a great need to be met. Your upbringing, your models, your access to leadership opportunities, all of that stuff, whether you are privileged or not, all of that reflects the fact that inside you, innately, you have an amazing ability to lead. Now, the reason we're starting here, before I move forward, is for this reason. Because this is probably the most influential idea that is out there to this day within leadership. Now, I don't know if you would ever call it like this, but this sort of, deeply spiritual, deeply impacting, deeply vision-centered, I was made or born for this sort of thing. It's something that, Hollywood has taken great license with as they tell a good story. And so we see this all throughout culture. Let me pause a moment and just check. Docs, are you able to hear me, or you and I are fine? Is that correct? Excellent. Okay. Again, Eden Neisna, I don't really know what to tell you. I'm sorry. But I want to just honor Docs of Brooklyn. And so we're going to move on. Now, as you can imagine, some critiques quickly began to arise as this theory sort of... there you go.
Okay, is it working on yours?
Can I join the semester?
Okay, so anyways, critiques to this theory. The idea that the people that were leaders, as Thomas Carlyle were writing about them, were basically those people that were aristocrats. They were people that were already in power. Usually these people were male. Usually these people were white. Usually these people were incredibly rich. And so, valid criticism, even though this was in the 1800s and history and just historical culture was quite different, a lot more traditional gender roles and that kind of thing. There was a valid criticism to be made from day one, which was, history, isn't it written by people that win history? So that kind of classic statement, I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but sort of a cliche exists that says that history is written and determined by those who win, particularly win battles. And so people quickly began to say, well, no, wait a minute. Why are only the people that are in power the ones who would be considered leaders? Why are they the only ones who have been innately born for this? Why are only the male gender the one that has been born for this? And though even though we weren't in a very progressive era at this point, the man that you see on your screen, which is Napoleon not dynamite, but Napoleon Bonaparte, the conqueror of France, would be your stereotypical great man in this particular theory. Now, if I look at this picture, most of what I want to do initially is just laugh because it's so silly. You know, his high-waisted pants and his hand sort of resting on his stomach, and the fact that he desperately needs to go outside and get some sun all scream at me. And yet, were we living in the 1800s or earlier, this would be an amazing example of this kind of guy. And so seriously, situation and environment, society, gender, amount of money that you had, or access to different, you know, things of privilege in those days, all of those were huge factors that were rightly brought up as this theory began to become more popular. However, we need to say this. This theory, as much as it may be problematic in some ways, spawned leadership theory and really has influenced the whole idea of leadership to this day. So here's what I want you guys to do for a moment. Feel free to, again, talk to each other for just a moment. And the question on the table is the question that I initially asked you. And now I'm asking for your just sort of personal opinion on this. And the question is very simple, 5 words. Are leaders born or are they made? So take a moment, and I want you to discuss that with each other, whoever you're with in person. And then again, when you're ready, please feel free to unmute yourself and just kind of somebody summarize and just say sort of what you think out loud. I will give you a moment to do that now before we move on.
Leaders.
Hello? We think that all people are born leaders, but it may be different kinds of leadership, different levels of leadership that they may have in their life. And we also think that your calling plays a big part in if you are a leader or not.
Okay. What do you explain that last part just a little bit further? What do you mean by calling?
Some people have a specific calling from God to lead.
Okay. Okay. So yes, I mean, right away, what you're raising with this theory, as I kind of go back a slide or two, is this idea here that although the means by which or what a person does with leadership may vary, you share this sense that leadership is this interesting combination of something that's given or gifted by God, that a leader is called, and yet pretty solidly you guys are saying together that you believe that in a sense leaders are born. Okay, and so even if some of this is seems antiquated to some degree because of sort of the culture that it arose out of, on some level you're telling me that you agree. Now, the group with Chanel Comfort, do you guys want to sort of give a simple thought?
Hi there. Laptop. We all believe that anybody can be a leader. It's something that you learn. And then we also believe that sometimes you're born with it, as you can see in children. when they play games, leading each other.
Yes, yes. Okay, so then it would be, keep your mic on for a second. It would be, you're kind of more in the middle. You're not necessarily saying that it's one or the other. It's a sort of combination of both depending on the situation and environment.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Okay, and what you guys are going to see, thank you so much for your opinion there. What you guys are going to see as we sort of get into this study over the next few weeks is that, like with any sort of subject that was being developed popularly for the first time or for the first time to a wider audience, things like what you just said about your environment and the culture that you brought up in were very valid things that were brought to these initial theories, and then, I don't want to say rival theories, but sort of other ideas spawned off of that. And so, in a few weeks we'll examine this idea of situational leadership, and that is exactly what you're talking about, that given a particular need or an environment or a role, a leader arises to meet a thing. And so, yeah, the question I just want you to wrestle with, though, about leaders being born or made. I don't necessarily have a particular perspective myself. I think I'd probably, if I had to choose, would be probably a little bit more down the middle. And yet I hear what you're saying, Dr. Brooklyn, and I believe very deeply that Christ followers have been given a calling by God. And so, this is an important thing to consider as we go forward. Now, any other comments for a moment? If not, I want to turn the corner a little bit. Okay. I don't know if you know this man's face or have ever heard of his name. This is a man by the name of Mark Driscoll. And he is a very famous, although some would say infamous, depending on your point of view, preacher, Bible teacher, pastor, and author. He's based out of a group of churches that are networked together in the Seattle, Washington area in America. That's on the West Coast, very close to Canada, the Canadian border. And he's influential for lots of reasons. And we're just we're gonna use him as a case study today. Now, first of all, I want to say that I understand that this man is not African. I mean, look at his face. And so definitely, this theory in particular is something that is rife throughout political leadership, in particular throughout many African nations. I don't say that to criticize any particular leader or nation, but just to say that great man theory is pretty influential for anybody who finds himself in a position of power. Now, the reason we want to look at Mark Driscoll, though, for a moment is not because we want to tear him down or gossip about him or whatever, but rather to examine a bit of a theology that he shares, and to just sort of ask, to some degree, whether that influenced this whole concept of being a great man. And so, again, please hear my heart here. I believe deeply in the church. I love pastors. I've been a pastor myself, and I'm not interested in tearing down somebody. And yet, some really interesting, horrible stuff has happened with this man over the last few months. And unfortunately, he's a perfect example of this whole theory. And so what I want you guys to do is this. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes, which is brutally not enough time, but to skim 2 articles that hopefully at least one of you has like a secondary iPad or Funda device or some Funda-enabled device that you can pull up these articles on. I'll put them on the screen, but it's going to be hard to scroll through at a pace that we all can read at. So I'm hoping that you can pull that up yourself. Again, they're under the Resources tab in Funda, and under a subfolder called Keynote PDFs. And there are 2 articles. One of them is a New York Times article, and the second one is an article from a website called Relevant Magazine. And I'd love for you to pull both of those up right now. I'm going to pull up the New York Times one, and then I'll explain a little bit further what we're going to be doing. So give me a second. All right. The New York Times is one of the largest distributed papers in the world. It's highly influential. Just in case you aren't sure sort of what perspective it comes from, it definitely is a bit more of a liberal newspaper. And yet it writes from a very formal perspective. You'll see, for example, if you read this whole article, that after they say his name for the first time, they call him Mr. Driscoll, which is just sort of a way that they respectfully address people. And so what I want you guys to do is I want you to quickly, as best as possible, sort of skim this article and particularly focus on the highlighted portions that I have pulled out for you. Let me show you where those are by making this a little bit smaller. You'll see there's a quote here by another influential pastor in the US named Timothy Keller. And then you'll see there's a long section here with about 3 or 4 or 5 paragraphs. And that is sort of the heart of this article. Take a moment and either with each other or on your own, if you can kind of skim through this, I'll give you a few moments, and then we're going to talk a little bit about its implications. Give me a second, and we'll come back to you in about 3 or 4 minutes. Just to honor the time, I'm going to go to the larger highlighted portion. Sorry for making it small, but I'd like to get as much of it on the screen as I can. Again, I'll give you a few moments to read this. Again, going to move forward down again a little bit. Last little section here. Now, as you're sort of digesting this and maybe continuing to read, just give an ear to me for a second. Let me kind of summarize for a moment, and then I want to ask you a few questions about this, not again about really Driscoll's actions, but more about sort of what this represents in terms of a discussion about the theory of leadership, in particular the great man theory. And so first of all, I want you just to see that this man is a really influential pastor within the conservative evangelical world particularly, but really throughout evangelicalism as a whole. He was, he had broad success within the emerging church movement, and yet was also simultaneously one of the leading champions of kind of a very conservative theological movement that has existed in the last 10 or so years called New Calvinism, which you can read about, you may subscribe to yourself, which is completely fine. And but basically what New Calvinism is as this sort of says right here, it's a theological orientation that embraces predestination, the idea that God has determined who will be saved and who will not. Now, that's not the only thing that it stands for, but an idea that goes alongside that is this idea that you're chosen. Predestination is about being chosen, in the mind of God, and determined that you are saved, you are redeemed, that you are one of God's elect. And what I want you to see there is that he deeply, deeply believes this in a theological way. Now, they rightly sort of give a bit of critique for him, because even though he is an incredible Bible teacher and very passionate, very fired up, very brash, which is something that ironically hasn't turned people off until lately at least, but rather sort of drawn them in, particularly young men who are one of the fastest group of people that leave the church traditionally. But he sort of, was so combative that he drew them in. And so, some of the other beliefs that he has that are significant on some level to this discussion is the idea of, oh wait, it keeps doing that. The idea of complementarianism. Some would critique that he even is not complementarianist, but he's actually chauvinist. He shoots his mouth off a lot, but at the same time, he has written a number of best-selling books. He has one of the most downloaded, Christian sermon podcasts on all of iTunes. And this guy, chaired a national church planting movement for a long time called Acts 29. And so, whether you share his sort of, whether you share that he has a lot to offer or not, the fact that he's influential is pretty hard to dismiss. And so over the years, though, he has steadily weathered criticism, particularly from the left, for things like his stances on things like homosexuality and the role of women in leadership, and etc. And the weird thing now is that this latest stuff that has put him in hot water has to do with an increasing grab for power that has come from other conservative Christians. A lot of times, people that worked with him and for him within his church. Basically, this stuff stems to sort of summarize this issue to some extent, something that happened back in 2007 where Driscoll and a few other people that worked for him began to slowly revise bylaws within their church constitution. And essentially what was happening there, it sounds really boring possibly to many of you, what was happening though is that he was solidifying power and authority to him and the people that followed him. And he was reducing it from people that opposed Mr. Driscoll's ways. And so in a sense, he kind of is a classic example of a leader, which all too often, unfortunately, happens in church contexts, where it was sort of a my way or the highway kind of mentality. I mean, multiple elders have been fired by him for objecting to this consolidation of power. He went so far to order one of them shunned, which is a practice that is widely been discarded, throughout church history. But basically, that's the idea that you completely cease contact with a person and essentially say that they are devastating and dead in a sense. Now, there's lots more to say about this, and a bunch of stuff online you can look up if you're interested in learning more about this. What I'm interested is not in how he behaves, although it seems like it's somewhat reprehensible to some degree. What I'm interested in is sort of the ideas of leadership that we can pull out of this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up I'm going to put up a quote from him first of all in response to some of this controversy. And then I'm going to put up a couple questions. And I want to take the last 10 minutes or so and just dialogue together about these and sort of leave you with some thoughts about great man theory. So let me do that now. Driscoll wrote an open letter to his church a few weeks ago after this controversy came out. He actually voluntarily stepped aside in leadership for the foreseeable future, just to allow his church to sort out this mess that this has become. It's become a very public thing. When the New York Times covers your church, typically that is either a really good or a really bad thing. And so here's something that he said in this open letter he posted to his church, which is quite large, as you possibly read. He says, in recent years, some have used the language of celebrity pastor to describe me and some other Christian leaders. In my experience, celebrity pastors eventually get enough speaking and writing opportunities outside of the church that their focus on the church is compromised until eventually they decide to leave and go and do other things. Without judging any of those who have done this, let me be clear that my desires are exactly the opposite. He says, I want to be under pastoral authority, in community, and a Bible-teaching pastor who grows as a loving spiritual father at home and in our church home for years to come. I don't see how I can be both a celebrity and a pastor, and so I'm happy to give up the former so that I can focus on the latter. Interesting idea. It's interesting how he sort of plays with the idea of celebrity and pastor and how they can exist or not coexist. And so this is kind of where I want us to head today, particularly as we think about this theory within the context of the church at large. You see on your screen 5 different questions that sort of play off of each other. And what I want to do is I want to create a few moments, just a few moments, 3 or 4, for you to take one of these questions and just dialogue through it with whoever you're with, if you're with somebody else, or on your own if you're watching this later. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about the idea of whether you think that the church has a problem with the great man theory of leadership. Particularly this first question, I think, is something I really am interested in you wrestling with. Why is the church so susceptible or vulnerable 2, embracing the great man theory of leadership without critical evaluation. The third bullet point asks a very similar question from a different angle. It says, why do we elevate pastors and other leaders to the level of celebrity hero? Is this healthy? Some other questions I was thinking about as I consider this issue in light of the Mark Driscoll situation is this question. How does the size of one's platform, your stage, if you will, play into this problem? Does it? What voices are being silenced or not listened to within this temptation, if you believe that this indeed is a temptation? And then lastly, is there an alternative way? And so what I want to do is just give you about 3 minutes or so just to consider this. I just want to start the conversation here. And then I'll sort of ask if you have any last minute thoughts, give you a last minute thought myself, and we'll wrap up for today. So take a moment, think about this. When you have an idea, again, unmute yourself and give us a thought. Wondering if any of you guys have any thoughts about any of this. Feel free to unmute yourself and just kind of speak freely if you wish.
Hi, I think that celebrity pastors have a huge platform and can connect with a lot more people than those that are just pastoring a local church. And so I think they have a lot of power to connect with people that wouldn't necessarily put themselves in the path of a pastor at any time. So people that are on TV like Joel Osteen or somebody that fills auditoriums can bring God into somebody's home without that person ever having thought of it themselves. But I think they need to have people surrounding them that are advising them and keeping them on the right path, people that they will listen to, because if they're not listening to their advisors, then what's the point in having them?
Excellent. Yeah, I share your thing. I mean, there are stories without end that talk about just the reality of how people have come to faith, and entire churches, particularly in some more closed areas in the world, you know, essentially are pastored by people from a distance. And so we have to say that that's part of this. And yet, I think you raise a crucial issue here, and that's the one of accountability. Is there anything else you want to say about that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say as well that people need to recognize that just because they're a celebrity pastor doesn't mean that they are a demigod. They are men and women like all the rest of us, and can fall at any time just like any of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's so huge. Appreciate that. Doxa, do you want to add anything to that? Thank you very much, you guys. That's brilliant.
Hello, yes. We just think that the world's actually desperate for leaders, for Christian leaders, because the world is so full of division and lies, and so we think, firstly, the world's desperate for leaders, so that is why the church is so susceptible to embracing the great man theory. And then we also think that it's a conception or misconception that in the Bible that like a Paul almost, or one of the apostles, like manly leaders, that perception out of the Bible that creates also being susceptible to the great man theory.
Yeah, and I mean, you're absolutely right. One thing that I'm thinking about, I'm teaching some students through the Bible in the Old Testament right now, and we're in the section within 1 Kings where the people start demanding a king. They don't want to be led by God alone anymore, and it's interesting to read about how reluctant God seems to be to grant them that, you know, and I'm sure there are many reasons for that, more than we can kind of dive into here without being in the scriptures together. But one thing I think about that may be related to this discussion is just the idea that sometimes we don't necessarily know what we're asking for, you know, and like I said, there's lots of good in people that have a platform and use it for good, and yet I think there's a shadow side to this too that creeps up, particularly on some of these guys. And you're right. The world is looking for leaders. The world wants to elevate people who have something worth saying. A lot of times we want to elevate people who don't have something worth saying, but they somehow have a platform anyways. And there's lots and lots and lots of reasons for that. And yet, I think your point, Chanel, or whoever within your group was saying that, sorry, I don't know your name, is the fact that we need to be careful to balance the distinction between being made in the image of God and becoming a demigod. And I thought that was really well said by you. And so what I want to say, again, is this. I'm not trying to be critical of Mark Driscoll or Joel Osteen or anybody who has a platform or is on, TV around the world. If anything, I want to be more sympathetic to them. And yet, it's such a funny thing when we are elevating the name of Jesus, how quickly our name gets elevated as well. And so what I kind of want to leave you with is just a simple idea back from this theory. And that's this. I wonder if the divine inspiration portion of this particular theory, the idea that God has put something in us that is worth sharing and is worth bringing to other people, I wonder if that's what needs to be elevated, not in a prideful way, but in a spirit of humility. And I wonder if that's actually something that draws people. Particularly if you look at younger generations today, one of the things they seem to be crying out for is transparency and authenticity. And so I just think that has a lot to say to this whole conversation. And so I need to be mindful of time. It's past due our time. Anybody have a last comment they want to leave us with? Okay, I really appreciate your thoughts. And I just encourage you to go back and consider this article and just this idea. This is not ultimately something about other people. It's something about you and the sort of leader that you are made to be. And so I just want to leave you with this idea. Whether you believe that leaders are born or made, you are unique. And God is within you. And there's something just absolutely profound about that. And we are interested in discovering what that is as a Christian Institute. So I want to bless you and just ask you to engage online with us and with other people within the class. Please feel free to message me if you have questions, and we will gather together again in 2 weeks for our third tutorial. Take care and God bless.